We're all ready to go.
Thanks, Jesse. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is the June meeting of Manhattan Community Board 4's ACES committee. We are coming to you via Zoom based on the continuing to be extended guidance from Albany around virtual public meetings. We have a longish agenda tonight, but a lot of good stuff. We'll launch with an open session. Anybody who would like can speak to us for 2 minutes about the topic or topics of their choice. Item number 2 will be a presentation from the Comptroller's office focused on DOE funding and some recent research and reporting that they have been doing. That'll be followed by a presentation from the folks at Hudson Guild on their arts programming. And then we'll have finally an update from the folks at the Shed on their community outreach efforts and their programming. There's probably at least 2 updates. They'll hopefully be quick in the old and new business section. So we should get rocking and rolling. If there's anybody who would like to speak in the public session, please let us know by raising your hand. You should be able to do that in Zoom by going to the bottom of your browser panel, and there's a little button that says raise hand. All right, we'll do about 10 more seconds of awkwardly staring at each other, and then we'll put a lid on it. All right, we're going to move on to our presentation from the folks in the Comptroller's office. I believe I'm passing it to, am I pronouncing this right, Miss Lay?
Close. It's actually Lai, but thank you.
I apologize. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. First of all, let me thank Jesse and the 2 co-chairs for inviting us to present today. We're very happy to be with you. I think I have a couple of slides. I wasn't sure whether I'm showing my screen or you're in control of the visuals. Does anyone?
Laura, you can share your screen. I think that's easiest.
Okay, great. So before I share my screen, let me just start by saying that the stimulus money that the city has received is a big pot, and among that amount, the largest allocation of that is the $7 billion that the Department of Education received. And although in the previous administration, there was some planning around how that money would be spent, the controller back in February, as part of a larger initiative he had to increase transparency and oversight over how the city was spending the stimulus funding, sent a letter to DOE for an update on the spending plan that they had released the previous October. And that spending plan broke down how that $7 billion would be spent over time. And it also highlighted many actually, programmatic initiatives that the previous administration felt were important for students and school communities to recover from COVID. And that included social emotional supports, it included academic work, it included really structural work in terms of things like PPE and making sure there was testing going on in schools, and all of that was laid out by DOE last fall. And we hadn't really heard much in terms of an update on how that spending was going by February, which was at that point nearly 3/4 of the way through the fiscal year. And so the controller wrote a letter to DOE to please ask for an update on those programmatic initiatives. And we received that information in April. And that's when our report on stimulus spending by DOE came out. And so I'm going to share my screen with that background information. Let me see. Let me actually find. Can everyone see that? Awesome. These are a couple of slides that are taken directly from that report. And I'll just preface this by saying that the data that we received was through March. The report came out in April. So I'm going to tell you what we found at the time. And of course, there's been a lot of talk about funding more recently. The DOE itself has updated this information. And so we can sort of talk about where we are now when I go through the information here. And so just keep that in mind. So as I mentioned, there were many categories of programmatic spending priorities that were outlined in terms of the $3.2 billion that DOE indicated it would spend this year of the $7 billion in stimulus funding. And one large category was taking care of the whole child, which is not focused on academic recovery, but more on social, emotional, and school climate initiatives. It included social, emotional, mental health support. It supported, it was meant to support efforts to grow learn to work programs, arts education, restorative justice, and a number of initiatives. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Could you make it, can you switch to presenter view?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not even
It's smaller.
paying attention to that. Let's see if I can figure that out.
I think if you just go to, I think slideshow.
Yeah, the slideshow tab.
The slideshow tab. Okay. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Second from the left, if you do from current slide, will probably be the most helpful.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
There we go.
I know something about education. I don't know that much about PowerPoint, so I appreciate and I should have introduced myself a little further. I am the education organizer for the Comptroller's office. So much of both the policy work as well as the advocacy and the work that we do with education partners like Alliance for Quality Education and others, I play a role in that. So I'm sorry for not giving you my background, but that's who I am. Anyway, so as I was saying, this large bucket of spending was supposed to be about $274 million of the 3.2 that I mentioned for this year, for this past school year, this current fiscal year 22. And once we had the data from DOE as of March, what we found was significant underspending in very critical areas. And, you know, I think when we talked to DOE about this, a lot of what we were told are things that you would expect. We all know that the pandemic has caused supply chain issues. We know that it's caused all sorts of delays in production. We know that it has resulted in staffing shortages. And yes, it's understandable on one level that spending the money was harder than expected. On the other hand, this was the year when kids were supposed to recover from 2 years of being remote or hybrid or just not having the academic and social emotional supports in place that they needed. A lot of kids fell behind, especially children who were missing special education services. And so it was vitally important this past year that these things happen. And what we found is that they largely were not. You can see that social, emotional, and mental health supports, $80 million was supposed to be spent. And as of March, just 33% of that had been spent. In terms of academic and instructional supports, see if I can make this happen again. Make it larger. Okay. Similar pattern. You can see one of the largest buckets of money was meant for academic recovery. That was $350 million that was going to be spent on academic recovery. And you can see as of March, just 30% of that, or $100 million, was spent. Some of these very important categories: early literacy for all, 20% of the money that was going to be allocated had been spent. And I'll just also highlight investments to special education. Sorry about that. Just shockingly low amount, 12% of the recovery services that were targeted for special education services, 12% of that money had been spent as of March. And so, the report that we issued called out this underspending. And we noted in the report what I said to you before, that there are obviously a lot of things going on, not just in terms of our schools, but just in terms of businesses, in terms of all sorts of sectors that had been slowed down by the pandemic, and we recognize that. But for students who did not receive their mandated IEP services for 2 years, this was supposed to be the year that they were going to be given the opportunity to recover from that. And if you at least look at the spending, it doesn't appear that has happened. And so, this was concerning. And obviously the money is not disappearing. The DOE can roll this money into next year, which I'm sure if they have extra, they will do. Schools themselves cannot keep the money, however. So any school, let's say a school will actually receive their allocation for special education recovery services, and because of staffing issues or other issues. In fact, one of the major issues as to why the special education services didn't work out was because of pupil transportation. A lot of these services were offered after school or on Saturdays, and there was no transportation for students after school or on Saturdays. And so parents could not get their children to these services. So if a school had money for these services and was unable to actually offer them, the school does have to return that money to the Department of Education. So in the budget hearings, the recent budget hearings in the City Council, the Chancellor updated our findings to say that since our report came out, showing that just less than just around 50% of the money had been spent, an extra $500 million had been spent by DOE. So we estimated in March that of the $3.2 billion, DOE had spent 1.4, and DOE more recently said they had spent another 500 million. So we're somewhere around 2 billion of the 3.2. And we're estimating that by the end of the fiscal year, and when I say the end of the fiscal year, obviously a lot of things that schools spend money on. So for example, they may buy furniture, and that furniture isn't delivered. The money comes from fiscal year 22, but the furniture doesn't arrive until August. So DOE won't be able to fully account for all of the spending that took place in this fiscal year. But when all is said and done, we still think they're going to fall short, and they will end up rolling that money into the next fiscal year, into the next school year. Now, what they will spend that money on, next year's stimulus money, we don't know. Last year, the previous administration said publicly that they were going to spend about $1.8 billion of the stimulus money in fiscal year 23. If we end up, let's just say hypothetically, we end up short of this year's spending by another $500 million, that could bump up that number. But we really have not gotten a spending update from this administration. They've said certain things that they're going to spend stimulus money on. They have, for example, Summer Rising. They're expanding Summer Rising. They're expanding the Gifted and Talented program. They are expanding their Learn to Work program. So they have issued statements about smaller, components of how they plan to spend stimulus money, but they have not, as of yet, come out with a new updated spending plan based on the new administration's priorities that gives an overall picture for how that stimulus funding is going to be spent. And I'm not sure if you saw it today, but there was a statement put out by the city council leadership in response to a lot of the concerns over school budgets being cut, saying that they plan to hold a hearing on stimulus funding at some point down the road to take a closer look at how DOE is spending the stimulus money. So we are still waiting for an updated spending plan, and that's where we are at this point. And I'm happy to take any questions or discussion that folks have.
Thank you. Really helpful presentation. And the way we usually do things is committee members have an opportunity to ask questions first. If there are any members of the public who have questions, we go to them next. So let me see if anybody has raised their hands. Looks like a couple folks. Sabrina, you're first. Alan, you're second.
Hi, thank you, Lara, for your presentation. Actually, so I know that you briefly mentioned some of the reasons why this the spending was not. The money was allocated, but it was not used. And I'm curious to know whether is it supply and demand issues? Is it staff issues? Like, what is overall, if you can mention at least the three reasons why, because it's concerning, right? It's like none of them is like even 50%, like 12%, 8%, like 32. It's almost like really shocking to me that, we have the money, but then we didn't use it. And then, as you say, it's complicated because then it's not as you can roll it. You have to come up with another plan for the fiscal year of how you're going to actually allocate that money for some of these programs or initiatives, right? So, and that takes time. And then also, there's all the things to factor into it. So I'm just like really shocked to see these numbers in terms of, it just seems, I know that we are dealing with so much with the pandemic, but wow, we could have done better.
Agreed.
So I guess my question is like, what are those three reasons why the money wasn't spent?
So I can give you the reasons that DOE gave us, and I will preface it by saying that for each situation, there's probably a different reason driving why the money wasn't spent. So, for example, devices for digital citizens. You could imagine that the DOE had a plan to order a certain number of devices and technology, and supply chain issues got in the way of that, right? So that's one thing.
But academic recovery, like
exactly, yeah. So
teachers
unknown about academic recovery. What I can say in terms of investments to special education, and there was a great Chalkbeat article that I'm happy to forward if you haven't already seen it, that sort of took a deep dive into this issue. It was really what I said. It was lack of transportation. So as some of you may know, yellow bus service ends at the end of the school day. There's no yellow bus service provided for after school. There is no yellow bus service provided for the weekend. And so the idea that you could turn mandated services for students with IEPs into an after-school activity was a fail because children didn't have transportation after their after-school programs. They didn't have transportation on Saturdays. It was also a fail because teachers didn't want to sign up for more per session work. Teachers are tired, they're exhausted, they are not volunteering and standing online to do extra work at this point. And so it was also a staffing issue in terms of that. And it was a staffing issue in terms of, I think, a lot of community-based organizations who didn't really have the bandwidth to do this because they themselves it takes so long for them to get paid by the city, and whatever staffing issues. And, it's really hard when to run a program when people are constantly going into quarantine, and it's just been a very difficult situation for things like that. So that's a specific example of how things like staffing and transportation have played a role in this. But as you point out, that is not like you could say it's a good reason, but we should have done better. Like, we should have done better in terms of, these are children's lives we're talking about here, right? This should not be the DOE telling parents, oh, you get an Uber, we'll pay you back. That is not how to run a recovery program for students. And so, yes, there are mitigating factors, as I said, that we know have existed during the pandemic for many, many sectors. That's not a reason for children not to have been served in the way that, we have billions of dollars to put to work here. And there's no reason that a year has gone by and we have underspent that money.
Thank you.
Alan, and then another hand on Alan and then Leslie.
Hi. Thank you, Lara. Thank you very much. And thank you for mentioning the transportation issue. It's something this committee is taking up very seriously, as it affects a large group of students in our community. So my math was never that great, but it seems to me that there's going to be about $6 billion rolling into 2023. Is that a good guess?
I think we're estimating about 5, a little less than 5. Yep.
Oh, okay, a billion here and there.
Yeah.
So DOE has control. So the school, just so I understand what's happening now. So the schools, at the end of this year, they haven't spent the money. They have to return this back to DOE.
Correct.
Does DOE then go back in September or over the summer and say, okay, you didn't spend this money. What plans do you have in the school itself that we can refund? Does that happen? Or, what is going to happen to this money, basically? And how much do the schools have in the say in how this money gets spent? How the districts?
So I'm not sure how familiar you are with how money gets allocated to schools. There's the basic funding that schools get in the form of fair student funding, and that's their per pupil funding, which we've heard a lot about in recent days. This money is being delivered to schools in what is referred to as school allocation memorandum, or a SAM. And you may have heard in other education DOE related meetings, people refer to SAMs. And so SAMs are sent to schools that announce an initiative that they can receive money for, and the school basically signs on and says, yes, I want some of that money. And so a lot of these initiatives, for example, this $350 million was sent out to schools in the form of a SAM last year. And the SAM, the memorandum, lays out for schools what is appropriate for them to spend money on in this category of funding and what they can't spend money on. So, for example, in the academic recovery, the $350 million for academic recovery, schools could do all sorts of things, but they weren't allowed to hire teachers. Like, they weren't allowed to pay salaries. They could pay for example, per session work. So they could pay for things like after school. They could use it to pay for substitute teachers who are paid sort of per diem. but they were limited in terms of hiring like a music teacher with the money. And so those spending allocation memorandum go out to schools. Schools sign up for what they think they can and cannot do. Same thing with special investments in special education. They were told you can use it for an after-school program. You can use it for this. You can use it for that. So schools have some ability to be creative with the money, but there are parameters around which they have to operate. Now, what happens is that if they don't spend the money, and this is not just true of stimulus funding, schools always have to give back the money that they haven't spent, all of their money that they haven't spent at the end of the school year. They are not allowed to roll over money into the next school year. So what will end up happening is the money will come back to DOE, and the mayor and the chancellor, as I mentioned before, they will come up with some sort of, hopefully they will come up with some sort of plan for how they want schools to spend stimulus funding next year. And based on those plans, they will send out SAMs to schools so schools can access the money. We don't know what their overarching plan for the money is. And I don't believe that any SAMs have yet to be sent out to schools. So we will just have to see. But that is how, for the most part, schools will see the stimulus funding. Now, will DOE Central decide to do certain things with the money? That's a possibility. But if you want to really know how schools themselves are allocated stimulus funding, you should follow the SAMs.
Okay, and the money that is going from the stimulus that is going back to DOE, is there a cutoff point where DOE has to return that to the federal government, or they can keep it forever?
They have to spend it for the most part by fiscal 2024. And they will. I mean, they will find a way to spend it. It's not as though New York City is going to say, we had this extra money and we couldn't spend it. They will find a way to spend it. It's just, it should be spent the way schools need it, students need it to be spent. We shouldn't end up with some amount of money at the end that they say, well, we'll just pay fringe with it or whatever, you know.
So if I could just take another moment, and I want to hold it up. So most of the funding here is, that's called course activity, programming that requires in-class education and programming with on-site school teachers. How about the physical structure? In other words, you can't learn chemistry if you don't have a chemistry lab. You can't learn biology if you don't have a biology lab. So does the physical structure fall into these categories as well?
You know, the physical structure and what you're talking about, for example, a chemistry lab is capital spending. And this money has not really been allocated for capital spending.
Right. And that's not something DOE can change going forward with the monies that they've collected back and now trying to figure out what to do with it.
You know, so the stimulus money in of itself has parameters that the city has to follow, right?
Okay.
And and that's a good question. I don't know whether the parameters of this money allow DOE to spend it on infrastructure, but the thing about yeah, that's a good question. And I'm happy to look into that. That's a very good question. There is some, you know, reopening costs and sort of facilities level infrastructure work that this funding went to. That was what was called, you know, health and safety reopening measures. So that was like air filtration and other sort of small scale improvements to schools directly related to COVID. So because this is COVID recovery money, your example, for example, a chemistry lab not covered for this recovery money, whether, for example, they could use it to improve a school ventilation system because that's sort of COVID related. That's a good question. And I'm happy to look into that. But that was not part of the
Right.
plan from the previous administration, and have not heard anything like that in terms of this administration.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience. Thank you.
Sure.
Alan, two quick footnotes before we pass it over to Leslie. My understanding, since I work with this stuff a little bit in my day job, is the time frame to spend is actually likely to extend. The Feds said that states could apply for 18-month extensions. So we're actually potentially looking at as long as 4.5 years for all these funds to be spent down. That would be, though, assuming that New York State actually applies for that exemption, which gets to the second thing that I wanted to say. The way this money flows is the feds say, here's all the money, here's what it can be used for. And then what's called an SEA, a state education agency, each state has one, says, in our state, this is what districts or LEAs can actually do with the money within the federal parameters. So your question has like multiple levels of dependency, if that makes sense.
I don't like the word dependency, but okay.
Leslie?
Thanks. Thank you, Kit.
Thanks, Kit. Laura, thank you so much for the presentation and following the money. And I'm just going to say, I'm really, really glad that you mentioned about the burnout, the teacher burnout, because a lot of this money, from what I understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of this money was allocated for extracurriculars, after schools, enrichment programs. And when the schools wanted to spend that money, they couldn't get the teachers to say, I want to do the extra hours, because COVID burnout was super real for them. So that being said, oh, and also I think you mentioned they weren't allowed to hire full-time staff for those positions either, right? They had to have extra within the teachers they have, right? The teaching hours they had, or the teachers they had.
Yes, the money could only be used, that $350 million could only be used for per session or per diem payroll. It couldn't be used for a full salaried teacher.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure. So it might be a little I think the schools tried to do this, and I think a lot of the staff, they just didn't have bodies that wanted to, sign up. So my question would be, and this is where I think maybe we can advocate. Did you find, other than that, which seems plausible, was there anything, I think you mentioned transportation, was there anything you found derelict? Do you know, where there was like dropping the ball, where this was mismanaged, this could have been done here, or that was mismanaged? Because that's where maybe, we can kind of shift focus, I don't know, and that we can advocate for you, or for not you, but advocate for the situation.
I want to, so nothing like that.
It might have been past the purview of this, it might be beyond the purview of your report, but I didn't know.
It's definitely beyond the purview of our report. But what I will say that I do think, had a significant impact was that we went through a transition in the administration, and we had a bunch of people. So the spending plan under de Blasio came out in October, right? So basically 2 months later, a whole bunch of new people showed up at Tweed who had nothing to do with that spending plan. And they also, there was a complete leadership changeover when the new administration came in. Thankfully, the CFO was, the DOE CFO was still there, but, there were a lot of people who are new and first learning what their jobs were. And there were priorities that changed. And I think, to be honest, that transition really had an effect on perhaps the way this money did or did not get spent. And I don't say that in a critical way. I don't think the controller wants to be critical because that's what happens when you have a change in administration, unfortunately. So we want to give the benefit of the doubt to the chancellor and the mayor that they will come up with a new spending plan, that we shouldn't have expected them to do that, the day they got there, and that they will find a way to spend this money effectively and equitably, given the time that they've now had to get their bearings and figure out the needs of school communities. So
Thank you.
you're welcome. And thank you so much for having me. If anyone has any follow-up questions, I'm happy to,
One more question.
Oh, sure.
Josephine has raised her hand. Josephine,
Yes, thank you. It's just getting some more clarification on, you had said that the federal money cannot be spent on hiring more teachers, like you said, a music teacher or whatever, but it would seem to me that if there was any time that we would really need to have more teachers to recover from academic loss, this is the time. So did they give a reason on why we're unable to do that? Because a substitute teacher is just not the same as lowering a class size, hiring a teacher, even if it is, as Kit says, for another 4 years when this money is available. But is there an actual reason that they're giving that we cannot do that?
That's a really good question too. And I don't know the answer to it. I've just heard repeatedly from schools that it was a frustration, that they could not provide the salary. So for example, the money, like 25% of the funding had to go to arts, but they couldn't hire an art teacher. Why that is, I don't know. I don't know if it's something that DOE decided or it's a condition of the funding, but I would be happy to get some clarification on that question, as well as the question on capital spending.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I know I said just one more question, but we do have one person in the attendees who's raised their hand. Jesse, could you bring over Britta Wheeler, please?
Bring over Britta now. Hi, Britta. You have to unmute.
Hi, thank you. Yes, I had a question because I actually run an after-school arts program. We do after-school programming, and there are, the whole after-school space is a whole unique thing that kind of, it's like a patchwork quilt. You never really know how to get funding, and there's funding from all these different pots, and then really it's all up to the school. So I'm always looking for new programs. I'm wondering, how we can connect with some of this funding and start new programs.
That's a really good question, Britta. I would recommend a couple of things. I don't know if you are the recipient or have ever applied for CASA grants. This is separate than stimulus funding.
That whole process is a complete mystery to me. I looked into it a few years ago and then I got overwhelmed and didn't know what to do. So
if you're looking for a consistent source of, for example, after school funding, I would recommend you reach out to your local city council member. City council members have discretionary expense budgets, and a portion of that is what's referred to as CASA, which stands for cultural after school something. And it's generally, the way it works is that you as an after school provider reach out to schools to see if they want whatever. If you run a dance studio, you can reach out to schools and say, we want to do a dance after school program. And then what happens is the local city council member allocates that after school funding for a school to use your programming. And that is usually something that rolls year over year. So if, let's say, you do the dance program at PSXX in this city council district, and that school loves your dance program, that will usually get funded consistently every year. In terms of stimulus funding, that is going to be probably based on any new SAMs that come out. And again, reaching out to schools to see whether they are interested in after-school programming using that
Okay.
stimulus funding. But I would definitely look into CASA funding. It's
Yeah.
a great way for, like I said, a consistent source of after-school funding.
Wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, I'm not seeing any more hands. So Laura, appreciate you going 2 questions beyond what we pledged to you.
No worries.
Gonna
That's
open
great.
it up to the committee in case there is anyone who wants to make a motion for a letter. If that is the case, I think there are a couple pieces of context that'd be healthy for me to share before we dive in. But curious if anybody wants to suggest anything. I guess the answer to that question is not right now, but we can always. Do you have something to say, Jesse?
Sorry, no, I'm having to do a little multitasking with my 3.5-year-old right now.
Totally empathize. We do have the folks from the transportation office coming next month, which is very much connected to this topic around budgets and federal spend down. And so we can potentially revisit covering both in one letter then. And if anyone changes their mind, we can circle back to this in new business. But I guess we'll just say thank you for joining us, Laura. And we hope that if we ask for you to come back, that we've treated you well enough that you'll say yes.
Absolutely. I'd be more than happy to come back. Thank you. Be well.
You too. All right, we're moving on to Hudson Guild presentation.
Hello, I'm Jim Furlong, Director of the Arts Program at Hudson Guild. And can I share my screen?
Yes, you can, Jim.
Okay. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Great, okay. So this is our one-sheet description of our program. And maybe, Jesse, after the meeting, you can forward this packet to the committee members if possible?
Of course.
Great, thank you. So the arts program has been an integral part of the Guild's offerings since it started in 1895. We had one of the first community theater companies in 1924, I think it opened, and our gallery opened in 1948 and has been presenting exhibits continuously since then. We opened a second gallery space, Guild Gallery 2, down at the Fulton Center on 9th Avenue in the year 2001. And it was closed from 2017 until last year, and it is reopened now. And you can see into that gallery 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, if you pass by 9th Avenue, which is a wonderful new feature that we love. And the goal of our arts program is two-pronged. One is to educate people in our community, many of them underserved, low-income families, and expose them to contemporary visual and performing arts made by professional artists. And then the second prong is giving people in our community opportunities to make art on their own. And that is by participating in our community theater group, which does 2 to 3 projects a year, or showing their artwork in one of our gallery spaces in group shows. We do senior shows, children's shows, and just 10 days ago, we had our annual Community Art Jam, which is one of our most emblematic events. That is an event anyone can sign up at any age in advance to show their artwork. And on the night of the opening, You pick a number out of a hat, and if you get number 1, I give you a hammer and a nail, and you get to hang your piece wherever you want in the gallery, all the way up to, well, in 2019, it was 97 people. This year, it was 63 people. Fewer, I think, because of still pandemic fears. Similarly, with our theater group, we came back to in-person performances this year. We did Around the World in 80 Days in the fall, and we just did Jumbo, a circus and dance spectacular all about romance last month. And we played to about 70% of capacity, which in some ways made people more relaxed spaces between groups in the theater. But on another level, we always like to sell out whenever we can. We also have a lot of different classes throughout the year, many of them down at the Fulton Center as part of our adult services program, and others as part of our after school and summer camp program. I'm just going to scroll down here. Our budget this year was $171,000. That was a little lower than pre-pandemic, which crept closer to 200,000. Keep in mind that the arts budget is a very small percentage of the Guild's annual budget, which is now close to $14 million. So the arts budget is between 1% and 2% of the Guild's budget. However, I think with that small amount, we get a lot of bang for our buck. This is a flyer of the exhibit that's currently down at the Fulton Center in Guild Gallery 2. We have a wonderful, fashionable director of community building at the Guild who put together an installation of what she calls fashion forward styling. And it's the target audience for this exhibit is teenagers. And it's meant to give them ideas about how to find affordable fashion, stylish fashion. And most of the work in this exhibit is machine washable, which we love. This is the sheet we handed out at our community art jam. As you'll see, we had 63 artists, several of them from Penn South, and really people from all over the city. We like our senior program, our arts program is open to anyone in the 5 boroughs. Our next exhibit is by a wonderful volunteer and artist who's been showing at the Guild for many years, and he makes these fantastic clay creatures, and we're going to cram as many of them into Guild Gallery 2. And again, you'll be able to see that from the street for 2 months at any time of the day or night. Our summer project for the theater company is a workshop called Stage Fright, exploring personal thoughts about fear and how to manage it in both performing arts and real life. We find that these workshops attract people who might not be interested in participating in a full production, may have anxiety about learning lines or their level of skills, but they like to come to these where there's no pressure for a public presentation and work with a group of people and perhaps develop new skills. So that is my modest presentation packet. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jim. Very much appreciate the presentation. Looks like Alan has a question.
Hi, Jim. Welcome
Hello,
back.
Alan. Thank you.
Pleasure to see you. I'm just curious, you have avenues across the street from you. And I was just wondering if you share any ideas with them, or do they participate? Do you participate in some of their activities? Or
Yes, Avenues has been very generous with us in bringing their students in to support us. We had a multicultural festival, and the Avenues kids took place in that. And we actually had a young Avenues kid sign up for the art jam, but at the last minute, the parents had childcare issues, and so they couldn't come. So Avenues has also rented our theater for one of their productions, at least one, maybe two, and we're hoping they'll be back next year. We're just beginning to rent the theater out again, starting in September. We have not been renting it for obvious reasons. It was too cumbersome to try to manage health screeners and with a huge flow of outsiders coming in, but we're starting that again. And hopefully when we start renting again, theater rentals make up a good chunk of our revenue stream for the arts program. So we'll be able to increase our budget next year and the following year if we get rentals back on track.
How do you get the word out on the rentals, on the availabilities?
Well, first of all, we have a lot of return customers, which is great because they're hip to the way we do things. And but we take an ad in backstage. Any help you can provide with spreading the word would be great. We only do weekly rentals. Daily rentals are just too much hassle for the amount of revenue we get. So we're renting. Our old renters next year are getting a rate of $3,000 per week, which was what we had before the pandemic, but we are upping our weekly rental fee to $3,500 next year for newcomers, and then the following year for return customers. Our costs are going up, and we're really feeling the bite of inflation. I'm finding that we have a wonderful summer program called Performing Artworks, where we bring in professional musicians, dancers, magicians to perform for our summer camp and our senior program, etc. And I'm finding all of those artists are asking for more money now then. So, I mean, yeah. I'm sure you're all aware of that problem.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks for all your hard work.
Thank you.
Wait, I have a quick question.
Yes.
Alan, sorry, I didn't raise my hand. Maybe you said it. When did the senior arts program begin?
Well, the senior arts programming is year round. Our next senior exhibit in Guild Gallery 2 will be next May, and that will feature work created in classes between September and April.
Oh, no, I was asking. My grandmother actually was part of the senior arts program. I had one of her paintings here, and I remember, and this is over 20 years ago, and I remember when she had it hung up and it was displayed. And I thought that was cool.
Was she in one of the community art jams?
I'm not sure. It was over 20 years ago. Alicia. Alicia, yes.
Yeah. Well, I've been here since 1994, so I probably met her.
That would be interesting. That would be cool.
Yeah, and anyone who's interested in our arts program, just shoot me an email. You get on our e-blast list. And then if you're a visual artist, you get informed about calls for group shows, submissions. Usually the best way we get to know new artists is in group shows. Everyone wants to have a solo show. And, you know, we have to divvy those up sparingly and give them to people with whom we have a history. And similarly, we have a performing arts list, which would send out e-blasts about the workshop I just showed you the flyer for.
I'm not seeing any other hands, but if anybody else wants to raise their hand, or as Maria showed, just come off mute and talk, that's welcome. But if not, I think, Jim, you are out of the hot seat.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for
inviting me.
answering our questions.
All right. Have a good evening.
You too. One thing I will put out into the universe before we move on to the folks at the shed is when we are going through participatory budgeting every single year, we sometimes don't have as long a list in the arts column as we do in the education column. We just heard from a long time community organization, I'll call it, in our neighborhoods that has its impact across a variety of different aspects of our lives, that they are not getting the level of funding that they need for their arts programming due to a variety of factors, including the current inflation situation. So curious if anybody wants to make a motion to write a letter of support or something along those lines. I see you raising your hand, Alan. Jesse, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Alan and I are the only two who cannot actually make the motion, right?
That is correct.
Kit, it's Tamara here. I raised my hand. I didn't use the Zoom hand, but I did like.
I'll make the motion.
Oh, thank you,
Second the
David.
motion. Tamara can make it.
Yes, I'll second it.
So we have a motion and it has been seconded. Tamara, do you want to sort of summarize what you anticipate going into that letter and we can quickly vote on it?
Supporting arts funding for Hudson Guild's art-based programming when it comes time to city budget process. Does that sound? Did I capture that?
Jesse, any flags there?
No flags. I think it can be general at this point, and I think if when we circle back to our September, October period where we're submitting actual, nuts and bolts budget requests, I think if there's something that Jim specifically can get us numbers on is always helpful. Whether it's a specific capital project or a specific expense need, and we can certainly circle back. But having this as a general one sort of puts it as a place marker for when we talk about it in September and October.
Perfect. Any questions before we vote?
I had a question. Well, I guess Jesse just clarified it because the budget just passed, so it wouldn't be included in this budget. It will be for 24.
Since they've been here for over 100 years, hopefully it can wait a little while.
Yeah, so just to clarity, we'd be talking about FY24 at that point in September and October. So
all in favor of a letter along the lines that Tamara outlined? Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? Anyone present not eligible? All right.
I just want to get clarity, Mercedes, if you're with us, I'm assuming you're in support of the letter?
Yes, I'm supporting the letter. I'm just on the train.
Thank you.
Item number 4 on our agenda tonight is our friends from the Shed are going to present on programming and community outreach. Tamara, am I going to you? I think I saw you.
I think we're going to go Jen first, and then I'll come up the rear.
Tamara, you never come up the rear. You're always adjacent. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for the invitation. I'm Jennifer Lamb. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Shed's marketing director. I've prepared some numbers for you, but I think what might be useful is to kind of take a step back and sort of reintroduce the Shed for those on the call or watching who don't really quite know who we are or could use a refresher. So the Shed's mission. The Shed is a new cultural institution of and for the 21st century. We produce and welcome innovative art and ideas across all forms of creativity to build a shared understanding of our rapidly changing world and a more equitable society. The Shed was designed to break with the traditions that separate art forms and audiences, and we strive to minimize social and economic barriers to entry, and we strive to offer a warm, welcoming space for innovation and in unique artistic experiences for all of our neighbors in CB4 and our fellow New Yorkers. So that's all nice and fancy, but how do we operationalize this? One of the sort of major instruments we use is our ticket access program, or TAP, as we say colloquially. TAP provides free and deeply discounted tickets to SHAD programs and is central to our vision of social activism and inclusion. And it's the primary method by which we sort of animate our belief that access to art is a right and not a privilege. So obviously this work doesn't happen in a vacuum, and we have a range of really dedicated, intrepid partners who shape our thinking and our outreach. So I'm going to give a shout out to some of these. Some of our key partners include CUNY, the New York City Housing Authority, Culture Pass through the city's 3 excellent library systems, the Department of Youth and Community Development, Cool Culture through our public schools and childcare providers across the city, and then a variety of other sort of program-specific partners who we engage depending on what the topic of the exhibition or theater piece or performance work might be. All right, moving on to impact. So to date, over 10,000 tickets and 4,000 households have accepted our invitation to visit the shed through TAP. Encouragingly, over 4,000 of those tickets, representing 1,500 TAP households, were booked since we reopened last October from our COVID lockdown. So, you know, that kind of makes me a bit optimistic about what the next year and 2 years might bring. Of the totals above, 12% of these households and 9% of these tickets were within the CB4 postcodes. And I'm just going to name them just for specifics. 10001, 10011, 10018, 10019, 10036. 83% of these tickets were comps. The remainder were $10 and $5. However, since reopening following our COVID closure, we have made it practice to only offer comps. So where are these TAP patrons coming from? So for the records, of the records for which we have zip codes, and there are quite a few that we don't, because if you just walk into the building and go straight to the box office to purchase your ticket, we don't really have identifying information. But for those for which we do have zips, 40% are coming from Manhattan, 28% are coming from Brooklyn, 22% are coming from Queens, 8% from the Bronx, and 2% from Staten Island. They got to get on a boat, so it's okay that it's 2% for now. In terms of what's coming up next, you know, it's been, I mean, I don't have to say it explicitly, but I will say that it's been a pretty difficult time to work in the arts, and it's an inflection point for all of us in arts and culture right now, particularly as we work to rebuild and reimagine audiences in the wake of 2020. You know, something that we're doing in our department, in the marketing department, is we're interviewing for an intersectional marketing manager position. This person will sort of assume day-to-day responsibilities for building and strengthening these relationships with our existing TAP partners to grow, well, to identify and grow potential new partners. And they will also be responsible for ensuring implementation and impact reporting on a project by project basis. So we have sort of rolling information, you know, the sort of aforementioned information that I've just identified. This stuff will be available sort of to the team and to our partners at large whenever we need it. So, you know, it's an exciting time, and I'm optimistic that this position will play a pretty crucial role in ensuring the shed continues to be the arts and culture hub for everyone. I'm happy to answer any questions, but Tamara has a slew of exciting program updates as well. So perhaps we can go to her first.
And I'll be quick so that we can get to the question part. Thank you so much, Jen. I'm going to talk about what's coming up this summer, but I did want to give a little update because I think a few months ago, I can't remember, a wonderful teen staffer from Friends of the High Line joined me for a presentation. We had worked on this massive Tomas Saraceno exhibition looking at sort of climate change and climate justice. And I wanted to just give some updates on the success of that program. About the staff at the Highline actually led weekly free tours for other students. We served about 200 local students. The Highline teen staff also planned a day-long activism and science fair that was attended by 500 people locally, mostly teens and their families. We worked with Fashion Industries, Humanities Prep, James Baldwin. Avenues did set up a table as well, so thank you for reminding me about that. I didn't have that in the report here. James Baldwin Liberty High School, NYC Museum School, Professional Performing Arts High School, and Quest to Learn, both from middle school and the high school. That was a really successful program. It was the first time we've worked a little bit with the Highline before and some pop-up performances, but really intensely working almost a year with their teen staff and their educators over there to really influence the programming that we're bringing to the shed. And I think it's an absolute model for us going forward that hopefully we can pilot with more organizations and bring more schools in. Something we think a lot about here at the shed is co-curation and co-creation, and the fact that when we're, Jen's talking about the audiences that we want to bring here, what's really important is to have those audiences have a real agency in the institution, and that is really creating the programming and helping with the outreach. Jen, I think you were on some amazing Zoom calls with the teams giving us advice on lots of marketing things for that program. So just wanted to give you an update on that. I love that Jim was here today because another program that we launched this spring was the Fire Ensemble. It's an amazing artist named Troy Anthony. I'm actually at the shed tonight because he has a rehearsal with the choir members. And he wanted to really build an intergenerational, intersectional choir. He's an artist that we've worked with, an emerging one, as part of our open call program. And it was really successful last year. He did a Juneteenth revival. It was so successful that he said to us here that he wanted to build a choir that not only had professional singers, but really anyone. He called them shower singers. And so we've been having weekly rehearsals here. And Jim was really gracious to actually host us a couple days in the theater at Hudson Guild to have these wonderful drop-in sessions. It will culminate this Saturday in a free performance here in our Griffin Theater, which will become an annual Juneteenth celebration. So I want to help spread the word. And that really leads us into a lot of the work, really for the next 3 months. All the programming that will be at the shed will be free. And so I know that at the end of my presentation, we're going to ask for all the kinds of support to help get the word out. One program that has been really from the inception of the shed, once all of us staff really got on board, was our open call program. When the last administration, something that we had learned was that both from the culture plan that was being developed, there was a lot of shift in funding towards equity, that there were certain communities that were just excluded from sort of the impact of the arts and not being resourced enough. And one group identified really was early career artists, wanting to have a 5-borough impact. And so in response to that, and also to sort of decentralize the curatorial voice and not be gatekeepers, we developed a program called Open Call. So we, since really 2018, before the building even opened, we've been working on this program. And so each year we sort of do a call for proposals. The first year that we did it, we received 900 applications, 2 months probably in sheltering in place. We received, I think, 1,600 applications. And last summer, we presented the work from those artists that we did that first year when we were sheltering in place. Just this spring, we did our most recent call for proposals and received about 1,200. I'm really excited to report that about 70 of those were from Community Board 4, and that is something that we are trying to increase, and that's something this committee thinks about all the time, is how to make sure that the opportunities that we have here, that our local neighbors get to benefit from them. And so we hope to select the artists for the 23-24 open call program by the end of this summer. And that program, just to give you a recap, we provide up to $15,000 commissioning fee. We give at least 2 weeks of creative development residencies at the shed. We partner them with curators, both at the shed and producers in the field to help them realize their work. Something that artists really need always is budgeting support, writing proposals, fundraising. And so part of the open call package is that we provide all of those services for free to selected artists. And when we think about opportunities for growth, I keep thinking, you know, we're going to select about 30 of the 1,200 people that applied, just because of there's just limits to the budget. But how can we? That means there are how many? You know, 1,000 plus artists that could really use these opportunities, especially really trying to come back and recover through COVID. And us being able to provide some additional professional development for them is definitely something that I think about moving forward. So the new cohort gets selected this summer, and then we'll work with them on a year and then present them in 23 and 24. This summer, though, because of COVID, we're actually still trying to present some artists that we selected in 2018, in addition to present the artists that we selected during COVID. So we have a series this summer, July and August, 8 performances, all free. It'll either be in our Griffin space, which is sort of a traditional kind of black box, and we have a more open floor plan space called the Overlook. So over 8-9 weeks, we'll be doing those presentations. We can definitely send you some more specific information about that. Also this summer, we partnered with Nike, who's worked with us a little bit before, on a wonderful free exhibition by the visual artist Tiona McLaughlin, really looking at exploring contemporary Black dance across a range of forms. That will be a free exhibition in our level 2 gallery, August 3rd through the 28th. And the last thing, and I do think this is something that's really important to the committee, is that, you know, each summer we nest the shed to reveal our plaza space. And part of that is to provide also open access to the air and open sky, but also as an opportunity. I keep thinking we don't have a stoop, but we have this beautiful public plaza, is to actually have a DJ and dance, participatory dance series that we're going to offer from about mid-July through the end of August. So I'll definitely, Jesse will send you some links and some flyers just so that we can spread the word about that. And something that's sort of the end of the programming. But what I want to say is this entire next 3 months, it's all free programming. I love that part of it is actually coming from community members like with the fire ensemble that have been in our neighborhood. So really beautiful to see them on the screen, on the stage. And what I would ask as the committee is always need outreach support, is how we best can spread the word about these programs and these opportunities when the programs are free. But what's really great about the Ticket Access program is it really makes every program that we do here, there's many hurdles to cultural participation. There's like many of them. We were just talking about transportation for education, but finances is one, and Ticket Access both really tries to remove that hurdle. So I do just hope that we can partner together. If you have suggestions for nonprofits, for city agencies, if they're housing developments, please do share that with Jen or myself. And as soon as Jen fills this position, I think it'd be really great if this person, the intersectional marketing manager, Jen, I think could give sort of regular updates around that sort of Ticket Access would be great. And the last thing is, I know that Jesse, you were really great to share some of the job postings that we had. We had to lose a lot of people during COVID, like many art institutions. So we're no different from that. We're just now beginning to slowly start putting some of those positions back up. And any support in spreading the word when we think about local hiring, we would also benefit from that. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, Tamara. Thank you, Jennifer. Any questions?
I actually have a question.
There you go.
Apologies, everybody. I'm relocating as we approach bedtime, which connects to one of my questions. It's really helpful to hear about all of the work that the team of the Shed has done to think about inclusion and making its programming accessible to lots of folks, diverse audiences, and people in the neighborhood. I went to my first ballet recital yesterday for our 4-year-old. And so I'm curious to hear, just out of personal interest, what are you all thinking about in terms of, continuing to have adding to programming that is accessible to families, especially families like mine that have young kids. I think about something like a participatory dance workshop, and that sounds like something my daughter would be ecstatic about if it was led by someone who could speak 4-year-old.
One of the things that we had to cut when we sort of went into COVID was we actually had the after school dance program that actually was really from, I think we might have had sort of first grade, might have been as early as we went, but all the way up through high school was our Flex NYC program. And it was all in 5 boroughs, and we had an amazing cohort of teaching artists. We did scale that back, Kip. And so I think part of what's been challenging is like, we don't have a collection here at the Shed. So there's not like a specific art form that we're always pulling from that we can build around a lot of curriculum. And so we've tend to focus more on teenagers and young adults and then obviously adults. But it is something we're thinking about as the programming becomes up, that there's some specific opportunities that we have. And Tomas Saraceno was a great example where it allowed us to work with teenagers, but also middle schoolers. I would say absolutely this summer, I can't say the names yet. So as soon as we're still confirming the artists, but there will be some amazing dance companies that we're working with that have really great teaching artists. It will be fun. We're really trying to think intergenerational. And so it really will be fun for the entire family. And what I will say is that although Flex NYC isn't sort of a standing program, and as I think we continue to build back from COVID, that is something that is missing in our sort of suite of programs that we're definitely thinking about. But what we do is just this weekend, and Jen was at a block party that was at the Whitney. So she was repping Shed at that wonderful Pride block party, but I got to work a block party that Penn South was doing, that Hudson Guild and Friends of the Highline was working on with some young people. And we were able to work with the Flex NYC teaching artists. And so they will again be with us this summer. So I always say that once you're in the Shed family, you're kind of always in the Shed family. And so anytime we do sort of community engagement work or outdoor activities, we sort of pull from those teaching artists that we've worked with. So it's definitely on the horizon. And I will say hearing it in a community board meeting like this helps me go back to the powers that be here at the Shed, which I'm part of that, to sort of say this is a community focus that's really important. And how are we meeting that need?
That's helpful and good to hear. I'm curious how the powers that be will respond to my next question, which is one of the challenges for folks trying to make it as artists, which is not specific to being an artist, but is true for folks of all walks of life, is just cost of living in New York is incredibly expensive, and housing costs in particular are prohibitive to many, including in our neighborhood. The Shed being located at Hudson Yards, and Hudson Yards having a good amount of housing stock. Has there been any conversation about, the potential that artists are getting to stay in residential units temporarily, permanently? Is that something that's ever been?
I don't want to say that if I don't know that it hasn't been done. I know that there's definitely like affordable housing components to several of the buildings here. So I don't know if that's specifically a part of it, but obviously I know that affordable housing is. It's definitely something I'm just made a note of it to see how we can follow up. I think housing is one thing, but the other thing is studio and rehearsal space. Since my days, even in Brooklyn, it's really important to have capital projects that give institutions, that give presenting space, but it is really hard. It's why, I love Jim and Hudson Guild. It's really hard to find affordable space at scale to meet the needs, to be able to do work, to create a work. You need a lot of times in the space. You heard Jim sort of say it, I rent it out once a week. So I do think that's something really important. And what I will say, I'm always thinking about, like, the Shed clearly has a responsibility. And I think that's that's like full stop period. But then what's the role? And I think you're helping me kind of think through, how we can advocate for artist housing, but also, more affordable housing in our neighborhood, and leverage those on our board that are able to do that sort of stuff. So let me make a note and think about what's possible. And maybe that's something I can circle back with you.
Yeah, we would appreciate that. I've been monopolizing the questioning. Anyone else have questions for Tamara or Jen before we close out this agenda item?
I don't really have a question. I just wanted, just for the sake of it, the public audience, and I might have missed it with me running around with my 3-year-old. Tamara, did you just disclose your dual relationship with both the shed and being a public member on the?
Oh, I didn't. So sorry. Thank you.
So everybody's clear, Tamara is a public member on the committee, and also, but also obviously works at the shed, and so that is why she's joined by Jen as well. for
Thank you, Jesse. Sorry about that.
No problem.
All right, I'm not seeing any other hands. So thank you very much for sharing all of this info with us, Jen and Tamara. Super helpful to get the update, and excited to hear what you all are thinking about working on. And yeah, Jesse will help spread the good word with the materials that get shared with him. Would anyone like to propose a letter of any kind? Going once, going twice. We are in the new and old business section of the meeting then. There is one thing that I wanted to loop back on and just share an update around. And then I had hoped that Katie Stokes was going to be able to share a little bit about a meeting she attended on behalf of CB4 and ACES, but she unfortunately wasn't able to join tonight. So hopefully we can do that next month if it's still relevant and she's up for it. Anyone else have anything before I launch into my piece, which will be quick? We may be getting out of here early tonight. So just wanted to update everybody that City Council is holding hearings on DOE food policy. I don't have much more context to share than that, but Julia McCarthy, who presented to us several months ago when we had her organization as well as folks from DOE talk to us about where they are with efforts to both update the menus to be more plant-based. And on Fridays, there was a lot of controversy around what was called Vegan Fridays, but DOE didn't actually want it to be called Vegan Fridays. And to get folks staffed and trained in cafeterias, and to hopefully restart a lot of pilot programmings that were very promising, but then got paused due to COVID. I have not seen the list of what is actually going to be covered by the hearing, but she let me know that many of the things that we advocated for in our letter are on that list. And so I'm going to try to get more information, and I can share that with Jesse and he can share it with everybody else. Not sure how much or how little we helped influence that hearing getting booked. But part of the reason why Julia said she contacted me is because it was a bit of an off-cycle topic to cover. And so she was curious if I knew more about it or we knew more about it, which I didn't, unless Jesse knows something that I don't. Leslie, I see your hand.
I'm sorry, Kate, was that, is it a hearing on the plant-based Friday, like that menu, or just in general, food, like service and food, lunches and everything in general?
I am waiting on an email with what the hearing is actually focused on, so I don't have the answer to that question, unfortunately, but I'm happy to forward you and share with everybody what I do find out. My sense from what Julia did say to me was it was a hearing about DOE food policy. It's not necessarily zooming in on the Friday piece. Any other questions or updates?
Just to say, obviously, if we feel we can, I mean, we were on record about it. We're on record about a certain amount of things about that. So if we feel like giving testimony as an organization, we certainly can, based off of their letter that we've written already.
I think it's possible the hearings either happened or started today, so we may have missed the boat, but I'm not 100% certain.
Okay. Well, if it's farther in a little bit farther in the future, we can, and someone wants to do so, we can provide testimony.
That's good. Alan, anything you wanted to make sure that we hit on before everybody goes off to enjoy their evening?
I did want to maybe update. One of the schools we had an issue with last year in terms of capital improvements that they had requested. This was the high school environmental sciences, and they were caught in the middle of a lease negotiation, and they were within a 5-year period where they couldn't get funding, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, we received an email from Michael Lipkowitz, the assistant principal, last week. The roof project, I think, is underway. They had also requested renovation of their bleachers, which were falling apart. And it seems, actually, I could give you a little bit of info from Michael. Again, it's one of these things that it's like, caught in outer space somehow, in between a rock and a hard place for a school that's trying to do best for its students. And it seems that their bleachers was approved back in 2018, then they got into this lease thing. And obviously everything came to a halt in 20. Now it seems that the cost of the bleacher project, which is essential for them in order to hold events in their gymnasium, and just for having students gather, is the cost has doubled. So we had invited Michael in for Monday to discuss this. He couldn't make it. He'll be here in July. So we'll see how things work out. We were hoping to maybe get something out to our electeds prior to the budget being okay, but seems there was an unexpected, pleasurable, first time. I don't know how often this happens, that it doesn't run down to the midnight oil, but it seems everybody got their heads together and okay this budget. So we'll have to see what happens with the education budget, and also how our electeds are handling and getting their own discretionary funds, because obviously there's a shortfall here, and we certainly want to try to push this, see if they can get this project done over the summer, so they can get back into business and using their gymnasium and bleachers and whatever they would need to do in September. So that's about, again, and it seems, I just, my own, personal comment, it just seems that SCA, who was in charge of this, somehow it took months and months and months before anybody came up with the information that this was going to be delayed, that this is going to be costly. It's just another one of these things that, kind of like gets lost in space. And all of a sudden, the teacher wakes up and says, so what happened to my project? Oh, so again, anywho, that's all I got to say. So we may get some answers in the next week or so. So if we do get some information in terms of what the actual cost is, Michael is trying to figure that out from the contractors. So hopefully maybe with the next couple of days, we'll have a little clearer idea as to what the final cost is going to be and how soon they can get this project going.
Leslie, looks like you had a question.
Yeah, maybe it's to Jesse. So Jesse, what usually happens in that case if there's a project that's approved and it's stamped like ready to go, but then there are delays, that weren't considered, and then the project budget has ballooned since then? Like what, does it just go back in the hopper and we have to put it back on our request list all over again? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, every case is a little bit unique. This one I think is, again, this is one of the situations. It's not a DOE facility, so there's that to add into that. And so I think there's two different running stories here. One is the issue of that the bleacher project is just taken so long to get done, and therefore, supply chain blah 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 is caused it to balloon. And then there's the issue of, as reported to by SCA to the principal as well, that there's the bigger project of the elevators, and so which is always a much bigger project. And so I think the principal is going to come in next month. I think hopefully between now and then we'll get more clarity, and we'll have to, once again, as we did before, for the school, advocate specifically for a particular project that, what I think the educators in the building think is an important project, and we'll have to help to try to cut through some of the bureaucratic tape as we did last time for them to get their lease done.
Thanks.
Thank you, Judge.
My 4-year-old just asked me if the meeting is going to be over soon. I think the answer to that question is yes.
My 4-year-old did the same thing, so we've got a quorum on that, by the way.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second that. I second that.
Appreciate everybody's time. Have a good night. Thank
Bye,
you.
guys. Thank you.
Good night.
Have a good night, everyone.